Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us. The space exploration program is critical to our shared future. Our fascination with space is one of our great equalizers in this country. These new domains require forward-thinking policies, an ability to understand the role of new actors and emerging technologies, and clear strategies to reach our desired future scenarios. We have gathered a stellar group of experts to discuss critical issues for this endeavor moving forward, especially those of sustainability and collaboration.
The idea for this event came about from the release of a report by the National Research Council that looked at the way forward in space. While the United States has a rich history in spaceflight, the future of space exploration is a bit unclear. The committee was tasked with looking at the pursuit of long-term stability for human exploration. It's about sustainability and collaboration. The report emphasizes that these are the two concepts that are imperative for a successful space program. Old rules and conventions may no longer apply. There are more actors on the stage today, but with that come more resources and more capability.
Given ongoing geopolitical turmoil, space exploration perhaps could be one of the few areas the international community can start building long-term consensus on. But we know it won't be easy. And the last 25 years, just here at home alone, over 20 NASA human space exploration programs of various kinds have been terminated, and 2 presidential strategic initiatives have been abandoned, resulting in wasted opportunities, resources, and time. But if we don't act quickly as a nation and as leaders of a much broader international effort that brings together our partners and our allies to keep reaching for the stars, to transcend Earth, to understand and harness what is now unknown, our window of opportunity may close pretty soon. We owe it to the next generation to keep trying.
It's really my pleasure to be here this morning to discuss the motivations for space exploration. I explore space to understand the context of humanity. I'm curious about where we came from and where we might go from here. Will there be a place for humans in the future exploration of space? Well, yeah, of course there will. Just think about it. A robot took this image, and this image has thrilled and humbled every human who has ever been informed about its scientific meaning. But it took a human with a Hasselblad to compose this image. And this image grips the human psyche without any need for explanation or interpretation at all. This image connects directly with our emotions. That's why I explore. That's what space exploration has to offer to all of us.
Good morning and welcome to the panel on sustaining NASA's human space exploration. My name is Jeff Foust. I am the moderator of the panel. I am a senior staff writer at SpaceNews. For decades, the space community has really struggled to try and develop a compelling long-term rationale and strategy for human spaceflight. For example, 45 years ago, even as NASA was celebrating one of its greatest accomplishments, the Apollo 11 landing on the moon, the Space Task Group was at work here on Earth, trying to develop strategies and rationales for the future of human spaceflight after the Apollo program. So the first question, what does sustainable mean in the context of human space exploration?
So sustainability can be thought about both in terms of technical and programmatics, financials, politics, but also cultural aspects. More broadly, however, sustainability, in my opinion, also has to do with how space exploration is aligned with larger issues in terms of the planet. Sustainability having to do with finding energy sources, clean water capability, all things which we need here and we will also need there. The need to sort of create linkages in the minds of politicians and financiers and the public, et cetera. Water is a huge issue, okay, both for propellant and for sustaining human life off-world. Water recycling, water reclamation, okay, water creation. If you're going to, use regolith, you can try extract. I mean, how are you going to do that? There are companies that are being founded right now, and their entire focus on is how are they going to mine water, okay, from bodies out there to use for rocket fuel. But it's not just rocket fuel. We have to have it to sustain human life. We have to have it to sustain human life here too. And clean water and the availability of clean water is rapidly becoming a huge economic constraint That discussion, okay, which is alignment of space exploration with larger global issues, with national initiatives, is one that we don't have seriously. We don't create those linkages seriously. So I see that as a huge obstacle. Okay, I also see it as a huge opportunity.
As a historian, of course, my first sort of thought is, have we ever had a sustainable space program in the human spaceflight arena, of course? And it seems like we haven't really had one, especially if you think about, there are magnificent accomplishments, of course, Apollo and Skylab and the shuttle and so forth, but they're not sustainable. Now, Apollo, first of all, was an anomaly, and Apollo, in the sense that it just was a complete, throwing lots of money at a problem and trying to solve it, is not the appropriate way to have a space program. So it's not a model for anything. It's a model for how not to do something in one sense.
Hannah, what does sustainable mean to you?
So I think the question should not be what is a sustainable program. I think we should be asking the question, what does sustainability mean in terms of humanity's presence in space? And I think the only way for us to have a sustainable future for humans in space is to target settlement now.
Unless you're doing something that provides value back to some mixture of stakeholders and supporters, it's not really going to be sustainable. So we're emphasizing human spaceflight today, and it's interesting because we don't talk about unmanned spaceflight, because scientifically, militarily, intelligence, commercial, there's no question that we're going to continue to be a spacefaring nation. The focus on human spaceflight as a kind of an existential question, are we going to have it, means we're still confused about, well, what's the value that we intend to get out of it?
One of the great contributions of NASA culturally, I think, to the way that we think today is to think in terms of systems at scale. It's our outer environment. It's the largest environment at scale that humans have a relationship with. So if sustainability, thinking about how we can bridge the idea of enterprise sustainability, but also environmental sustainability, if we think about sustainability as signifying sort of a better way of understanding and improving the human-environment relationship.
In a fundamental way, the reality is in this country we have a government-supported exploration activity. That may change. There are signs of interest sufficient to suggest it may not have to be a purely government effort. In fact, it should not be a purely government effort. But in the end, the largest risk taker in terms of investment of capital is going to be the government. We do have on the books in the law what I consider a program of exploration, one that's been endorsed by the Congress for the past 8 years, consistently. And by all appearances will be endorsed by the current Congress. We've had a lot of discussion and debate over that, but fundamentally that's been based on resources.
Some of you touched on this in your comments, but I wanted to throw this out for anyone else who wanted to come in. Is what the program that we have today, the program of record that is on the books for human space exploration at NASA, sustainable today in its current plan and implementation? And if not, why not?
You can't expect to do all NASA wants to do with the budget numbers they have. But it doesn't need to be the case, is my point. And the fact is, we can as a nation and with partners resource exploration in the way it should be. Not in an adequate way, but in an appropriate way. We just need to make the case. The fact is, the wealth is there, the money is there. The fact that NASA has a flat budget is a choice.
But I think one of the primary problems we have today is the conceptualization as to, well, why are we doing human space exploration? And we don't really come up with an answer. We have something we call capability-driven evolution. Exploration in the past has been done for various geopolitical reasons, various international reasons, and really the current situation today of this kind of capability-driven evolution where we're not really sure where we're going, but we'll make something up along the way, I think is a great handicap to the program. And in many ways, it is an echo and a continuation of policy decisions that were made many decades ago.
Human beings have always sort of broken into a couple of different groups, and this is obviously a wild generalization, but there's the groups that want to settle down and build communities where there are, and then there's those groups of people that want to go over the next hill. And going over the next hill It's a high-risk proposition, and it doesn't make any difference if that proposition is in 1492 or if that proposition is in 2014. It's a high-risk proposition because the next hill always represents the unknown. But culturally, we celebrate those people who have gone over those hills, whether they've been looking for gold or they've been looking for resources, they've been looking for free passage, they've been looking for trade, whatever it is that they've been looking for, there has always been value that has accrued to exploration, always.
The conclusion was that we need a government-led program for the fundamental capability of having a launch capacity to go beyond low Earth orbit, and that any mission to any place, virtually any place beyond low Earth orbit, needs a heavy lift. There are statements in the language going back to the 2005 Act stating Mars is the ultimate destination. Human population, permanent settlement of the solar system is a goal, an overriding objective, as this report also endorsed. But we weren't going to go express in a single legislative effort that whole path forward, because we knew, based on SEI back in the 90s, that if you put the whole package on the table and add it all together, vehicle, landers, on-orbit activities, in-situ resource, it's all going to end up totaling $500 to plus billion, and it's going to die because the Congress tends to see long-term, even long-term proposals, even over 20 years, like the SCI was 500 million, as money they're spending now.
Is exploration really is that the right word about what we want to be talking about? Do we talk about human spaceflight in general? Should we be talking about exploration itself, or should we be talking about the future of humanity in space? Hannah.
I think if we talk about the future of humanity in space, then the other components will follow. Because if humans have applications to be in space, then we will develop the spaceflight capabilities and we will develop the exploration capabilities.
It may be more like an Antarctic base, or it may be more like a remote oil platform. There are many different possible futures. But if there's going to be a human future in space, and we don't really know what it might be, then the next question is, well, what values are going to be on that future? And this is where I get down to a first postulate, which is I want the values of basically Western society and my own culture to be part of that.
We seem to have forgotten that low Earth orbit is still space, and the space station is still in space, and frankly, that now that we have a lot of new players, one of the values that drive space exploration is space utilization, space exploitation. There's a whole new sort of construct in terms of space, quote, exploration has to now include the fact that there's a private sector element, commercial capital investment, free enterprise driven aspect of space that hasn't been there at this level ever before, and that makes a huge difference in the prospects for continuing and expanding access to and use of space.
There's a lot of players there. And they all have a lot of different interests. And for us to be certain that we're going to move out into space and carry those things with us, we need to be thinking about what government can do to actually facilitate and protect free economic ideas and free markets and how those are going to develop in space. We need to do that thinking now, and we need to be pretty vigilant about that.
The NRC report talked about some pathways. How do we get there from here? The report basically said that Mars is the ultimate, the horizon goal, I believe is the terminology that it used, but there are different pathways to get there. How do we choose the best pathway? What is the best pathway to get to Mars from where we are today?
I think in order to get to Mars, and not just get to Mars and say, okay, done, let's go back, but to sustain spaceflight to Mars, we need to stop thinking of Earth as our only base. We need to not always rely on making the majority of the mass of our spacecraft dedicated to fuel for getting off of the Earth.
The best pathway to Mars is the one that gets you the votes in the next Congress. It's fine to have that long-term vision, and I think that's appropriate because that helps you give you some context. But you need to put together a coalition of people who will vote for you that way. And that's not simply a domestic political issue. It's also one that involves industry, it involves government organizations as stakeholders, it involves our international partners. Going alone is actually quite a negative, not a positive as it was in Apollo.
We're doing the spade work now that's necessary to be able to enable all those missions. The idea of going to the moon is, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the Congress is concerned, I believe, not off the table. I mean, they're looking at the flexible path. They're looking at any destination that makes sense. And so that's where I think you're right. The one that comes in and shows the most return on and bang for the buck is going to get the more votes and is going to get supported. NASA's going to start doing that as the next phase of moving beyond the capability issue, because it's time. It's time to do that. It's past time to do that in some people's mind. So I think we're in the right place and doing the right things, frankly.
Right now, there is no such strategy, no such sort of policy really to rethink these things. There's a lot of institutional inertia. Somebody adopted this thing and we're just moving forward and it's just sort of stumbling forward. And I think we need to sort of really step back and stop. And I think the opinions of the international partners are extremely important in this respect.
What destination are we trying to get to? Are we trying to get to one where there is an inclusive international community, there's an inclusive commercial community, where there's one that we are demonstrating capabilities that allow us to live indefinitely beyond the surface of the Earth? And that all is really sort of silent, at this point.
How do we make this human space exploration more interesting, more compelling to the average person? How do we make this case to the broader public?
It needs to be relevant to the broader public. It needs to be relevant to, every single person who is thinking about this. And I think we also need to see that it's not just, engineers and billionaires that can participate in this. I think looking at students especially, there's this huge misconception that space and the space industry and jobs in the space industry are only for engineers, aerospace engineers too, because computer scientists say the same thing, like, oh, that's not for me, but space is a software problem now.
The thing today that people ask is not only what is the space program doing for me, but how do I participate in it, how do I relate to it? And this is why the prospects of space tourism, if it can be done safely and at right price points and a whole bunch of other caveats, space tourism is a very powerful pull because that sense of personal participation. This is why some of the small satellite issues are very important, because it's more hands-on, actual tangible experience versus being done by somebody else. And this is why space as an information technology is very important, because things like GPS and GIS, of which Planet Labs and Digital Globe and other companies are increasingly a part, allows them to participate in using space in a very tangible way here on the ground. Well, I think part of that is we need to get away from a situation where we're dependent upon sustained emotion. Yeah. Sustaining a program on emotion, I don't think, and Apollo in many respects was created by, emotion. Whereas today the idea of space as part of the information economy is basic, and it's sustained by the value it provides there.
NASA has done a lot of international partnerships. Some have been stunningly successful, like the International Space Station. But NASA in other cases has had a reputation as a bad partner pulling out of particular ventures. How does NASA make the most use of international partnerships in any sort of human space exploration program? Do we build upon the ISS, use that as a model for the future? Do we take a different approach? Do we do something else?
I think ISS is a great model, and I think it's referred to often as a great model for the future. Even in the current context of potential Cold War reignition, you don't see any impact on the relationship between the U.S., the Europeans, and Russia in terms of the space station. I think it's because there's mutual value among the international partners.
We need ways of participation for countries at many, many different levels of capability. So, and I'm known for, of course, being an advocate of the moon as the next step. But one of the reasons I'm an advocate of that is because I believe it has what we might call many different price points. That is, you can enter with a $1 billion lander, you can enter with a habitation module, you can enter with a small rover on the surface, you can enter with a hosted payload, on another vehicle. So there are many different places at which you can enter.
Is that sort of long destination timeframes useful in a sustainable program? Do we need a more concrete, shorter term series of goals and destinations?
Well, it's a trade-off, right? I mean, the longer you stretch out a program, there's more risk and interruption. But if that's the only feasible way you can do it, then maybe that's a better way. The shorter you have a program, you have to have much more commitment, political, financial, etc., and you reduce the risk of interruption, but that's may not be the program you get.
Anything that long term, it just opened itself up to mischief in Congress, frankly, to people who want to redefine, the next big thing. I think you need to have incremental near-term objectives that are real and tangible and exciting.
Specifically, NASA needs something that will excite the students now if they want the students to go to NASA, because these other commercial companies, have all these exciting opportunities and have work that the students can participate in right now. Whereas, it doesn't seem that the brightest students are looking to NASA anymore, because it's kind of become clear to them that you'll spend at least 8 years on a project, and by the time it flies, the technology is completely obsolete.
Are they more interested in working for some of the commercial space companies like SpaceX or Virgin, or are they just saying, space is too slow, I'm going to go build the next Instagram and make $1 billion?
There's something about space that, it really means something to people, and people will students will sacrifice lots of money from, Facebook to go work at a space startup. They're excited about participating, and they need something that they can participate in that will happen in their lifetime, and not just in their lifetime, but in the next 10 years. They want to do things, and these long pathways are not super compelling in that respect.
Does the exploration plans drive the technology development, or does technology development drive the exploration plans? Which is the push, which is the pull?
In a perfect world, you'd want NASA to be able to have the money to do technology development and sort of do the leading edge, high risk technologies that businesses aren't likely to do. But when you have a cap on resources and a demand to build a vehicle in a short period of time to be ready to go do a mission, you can't do that. Let's establish the value of the space program to this society and this country, and then articulate that to the policymakers. How do we make that case that says we need, as the Augustine Committee subtitled its report, a space program worthy of a great nation?
That kind of management, that kind of communication with the public, translation of value is a technology. It needs to be invested in at the same level as other kinds of technologies.
I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to provide some concluding remarks. What you think is the biggest obstacle or the biggest issue associated with creating sustainable human space exploration going forward?
The principal impediment is the political election cycle and the changing of the guard every few years. It's highly disruptive, there's no continuity, and so I think that's the major thing here. And I think that relates to a larger issue about goals, but also a larger issue of how we're doing this thing, and I think that requires some sort of expansion of our vision in terms of public-private, but also international partnerships.
In order to sustain a program and sustain a human future in space, we need to have a goal that is both relevant to the average person and that the average person can participate in. And I think the only thing that truly fits that goal, or as a goal, is settlement.
Some of the most important foreign policy, international affairs issues, I think today's, are areas that are beyond traditional sovereignty. So talking about the high seas, the area above the high seas, Antarctic, Arctic regions, cyberspace, and space. So shaping rules, norms of behavior for these regions, I think, is one of the big global challenges for the United States going into the 21st century. Space has a lot to offer that I don't think really are terribly appreciated. Space is one of the most interdisciplinary of activities you can engage in. In order for human spaceflight to be successful and safe, you have to master every field of technology, system engineering, every discipline you can think of. And so by doing that, space is a great teaching tool, and is a teaching tool that I think can have benefits really across the economy for the next generation.
We have grand challenges as human beings and as Americans when it comes to human sustainability on Earth, and I think drawing a closer, tighter connection between what it means to have a sustainable human spaceflight program to sustain life in space and to sustain life on Earth. I think those links are there. I just think they need to be more explicit, stronger, clearly articulated, and that we synergize those grand challenges.
My goal would be to see the full, aggressive, appropriate funding and support of the space program, the entire space program, be a matter of political necessity. And the way to do that is to identify these linkages and values fully and completely, and then articulate them, and then take that message out there and get it. And that's what's not happening now.
Great. Well, on behalf of the panel, thank you very much. I hope this was an enlightening panel. Thank you.